Good morning. My name's Patty Kelly, and I will serve as your worship leader this morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. We're glad to see you here on this beautiful day, and for those who are at home, we wish you could be here with us. It's a gorgeous day in Cincinnati, but we're pleased to have everyone here. As you may know, our congregation was founded in 1830, and we have worshiped in this building since 1889, but we acknowledge that we occupy land that is the ancestral home of the Adena and Hopewell cultures and the Miamia and Shawnee peoples. We are a community committed to social justice and to supporting the various spiritual and ethical paths of our members and friends. You'll see signs like this all over the building. They show various accommodations that we have because we want everyone to feel comfortable here. Whether you need a gender-neutral bathroom, which is upstairs, up the elevator, and down the hall, or if you need hearing devices, the ushers can help you in the back. But you can find these signs, and of course the ushers can help you with anything you need. Incidentally, if you need to leave the service, you can do that. There are speakers in the room just outside, so you won't have to miss anything. And if you would like to know more about our church or about the Unitarian Universalist faith, please contact us by emailing member-care@firstuu.com. The flowers today are from Mary Mark and David Johnson, in memory of their beloved dog, Cassat, who was put down this past week after 13 glorious years. I'm sure we all join in sympathy for their loss. As Michael lights our chalice today, I will read a text from the UUA Leadership Council meeting in 2009. With humility and courage born of our history, we are called as Unitarian Universalists to build the beloved community where all souls are welcome as blessings, and the human family lives whole and reconciled. With this vision in our hearts and minds, we light our chalice. Now, please rise as you are willing or able and join in the vision song. The words will appear on the screen. And afterwards, please turn and greet your neighbor, or if you're watching online, please say hi in the chat. I know it's hard to come back together after we're having such a good time, but you can chat more at coffee hour. So today we're going to be singing some hymns, and I really encourage you, despite the fact that the words are on the screen, to pull out a hymnal if you got one, if you can sing in parts. This is near and dear to my heart. I hate the thought that people only sing the melody when there are plenty of people capable of singing in parts. So let's make a joyful noise and join in hymn number 112. Please rise as you're willing or able in the gray hymnal. 112, Do You Hear?
For our story today, I have a few props. And so I'm going to sit here, and I'm hoping my friends over here in the VIP lounge will join me. Yes, Lily, the props that I took from you, I will give back. You can help me take them home. So when Frances Ellen was born, her mother held her in her arms and said, "You are the most beautiful baby in the world. With your brown hair and brown eyes and brown skin, and you are so lucky because kids that look like you today are still made into slaves. But you, Frances Ellen, are free. Someday, everyone will be free." And do you know what Frances Ellen said? She said nothing. She's a baby. Now, Frances Ellen, when she got older, she started to go to school, the school that her uncle did. And you know what her uncle said? He said, "Kids, you are so lucky because kids that look like you, many of them don't get to go to school." This is mine. He said, someday everyone will get to go to school. Would anyone like this?
No, I do.
All right, maybe the next one. Unfortunately, Frances Ellen couldn't stay in school. When she was 14, her family needed the money, and so she had to quit, and she started working as a maid. And she would sweep, and she would care for the children, and she would cook. Now, thankfully, the house that she worked for was a Quaker home, and they had all sorts of books, and when she wasn't cleaning or cooking or caring for the kids, she could read and write to her heart's content. But she said, someday kids are not going to have to quit school to help pay the bills. Anyone like this?
I do.
There you go. And with all the things that she wrote, eventually she published a book. Yes, Lily, you can hold it. Yes, you can hold the pink one. So she published this book. And people were amazed. They said, no way a woman wrote this. No way a black woman wrote this. And Frances Ellen, you know what she said? Someday, people will know that anyone could do anything, no matter if they're a boy or girl or non-binary. She probably didn't use that last one. But I'm sure the sentiment was there. Or they'll know that you can do anything regardless of what your skin looks like. Who would like to hold this big, big book? There you go, Marlo. It is heavy. Unfortunately, someday wasn't coming quick enough. So you know what Frances Ellen did? She started sending money to people who were still enslaved so that way they could run away and make a new life. She started speaking out against slavery, and she wrote more and more and more. And eventually, after a war that nearly tore this country apart, slavery was outlawed. Who would like this money? Here, give that. There you go. However, there were still a lot of Sundays yet to come. People still didn't have access to food or housing. Kids still had to quit school sometimes. And so you know what Frances Ellen did? She did more speeches and wrote more books. And she decided she would join the suffragette movement so that women would have the right to vote. And she went down to the South and she established schools. And she worked with churches so that way that people who were hungry could have food and people who didn't have houses could have houses. And of all the churches that she worked with, she joined the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. Because she knew that the someday she was working towards, they were working towards too. It's been over 100 years since Frances Ellen was working towards those somedays. And a lot of things have happened. Kids no longer have to quit school to work. There's no longer slavery. Women have the right to vote. But there are still a lot of somedays that still need to happen. Because not everybody has food, and not everybody has houses. I wonder what some days you are working towards. Now, if all my friends could put our story props back into this box, and we will go to our classes. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Meredith, for that wonderful message. It's wonderful to hear about people who preceded us in this faith, isn't it? And now it's time to share our joys and concerns and sorrows. Part of being a beloved community is sharing joys and concerns with each other. And if you would like to share something in the congregational weekly email or in the newsletter, or if you would like to speak with our resident chaplain, the Reverend Mary Tarbell Green, please fill out this form on the back of your order of service, and you can leave it in the offering basket either as it passes you by later or in the basket on the desk as you leave the sanctuary. But right now, we are going to use our ritual in which we share our joys and concerns. The water before me represents the love of our community. We drop a stone in the water to seek the softening of our sorrows or the amplification of our joys. All the individual joys and sorrows come together in one bowl of water so that they can be symbolically shared and borne by our community. We invite you now to come forward, if you wish, up the side aisles and back down the middle to amplify your joy or soften your sorrow. We will now drop 3 more stones into our water of community. One is for all the joys and sorrows outside these walls that go unmentioned. A second stone is for the joys and sorrows that go unspoken, but that we have closely guarded in our hearts. And lastly, a stone for the brokenness in our world as we search for ways to be agents of wholeness by placing ourselves in that breach. And now we're going to sing some more. So please pull out your hymnal or look on the screen. We're going to sing hymn number 148, Let Freedom Span Both East and West. Please rise as you are able. Seated? This month's Share the Plate offering goes to the Carter Social Justice Fund. This fund allows First Church to support many wonderful community organizations in the greater Cincinnati region. Your contributions to this fund have a direct local impact in addressing the social justice issues of our city and region. Please give generously and help make our community stronger. Giving to First Church is easy. You can text the word GIVE to 513-717-7373, or you can give online at firstuu.com. You can also write a check to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati and mail it to 536 Linton Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45219. If you'd like to make a donation to the Share the Plate offering, please write in the memo line, the Carter Social Justice Fund. Many of you will remember the wonderful Veterans Day sermon we had last fall that was given by my friend and UU minister, Reverend Rina Shere. Just to remind you a little bit about her background, Reverend Rina's ministerial call lies in community ministry and chaplaincy. She currently serves as a mental health chaplain at the Cleveland VA Medical Center. She provides spiritual care to veterans with a focus on serious mental illness, PTSD, and moral injury. In 2021, Reverend Rina was awarded a fellowship to pursue a DMin at Vanderbilt Divinity School focused on mental health integrated chaplaincy. She also serves as the affiliated community minister with the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. Reverend Rina lives in Shaker Heights, Ohio with her husband. Her interests include the arts, politics, gardening, and sacred medicine. Reverend Rina planned the service today around two influential but unfortunately not well-known Unitarian Universalist women of the past. We learned about Frances Ellen Harper Watkins in Meredith's Story for All Ages, and now Reverend Rina will share with us how another UU woman, Viola Liuzzo, lived out our fifth principle. Although Reverend Rina was not able to be with us in person, she recorded this sermon just for us today.
Good morning, First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. My name is Reverend Rina Shere, and I'm very happy to be with you this morning in May to talk more about our fifth principle and the story of another woman who may not be very well known to you, the story of Viola Liuzzo and her role in the social justice struggle in 1965. You heard in the story time about Frances Harper and all of her work in the 1800s around slavery, abolition, using her voice, using her gifts to really push against what was not right and what was happening in her world. And so I'm going to begin to set the stage for what was going on in Alabama in 1965 and share more about how Viola became involved in this struggle. So I'm just wondering how many of you may have a lived memory from 1965 or living through that civil rights era in American history. Maybe you have seen news clippings or watched documentaries or perhaps even the movie Selma, which came out several years ago, which really depicts the struggle that was happening in Selma and Montgomery in 1965. The role of Unitarian Universalists in the struggle to advocate for equity is a story that needs to be better understood as we grapple with so many current race-related issues, Black Lives Matter, issues with health, inequality, mass incarceration, and police brutality. In researching this sermon, I came back to our fifth principle again and again, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. When I first joined the UU Church 25 years ago, this principle was really a curiosity for me. And I remember thinking, why does the democratic process need to be so explicitly stated as a religious value? I was new to the Free Church. I had grown up Presbyterian, but over the years of my involvement as a layperson, a director of religious education, a minister, and now a chaplain, this principle has become one of the bedrocks of my ministry because, as the Reverend Earl Holt III states in the book, With Purpose and Principle, democracy is an expression of faith in the power of human beings to shape their own lives, a faith that is most explicit in the ideals of our Unitarian Universalist religious tradition. This idea that we have a faith in the power of human beings to decide what their future will be is so important to understanding why Unitarian Universalists have been so strongly drawn to social justice issues for, the last 200 years. These are very powerful words that can be used to underpin social activism efforts, particularly those efforts involved in nonviolent tactics, such as the marches and rallies led by Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference during the Civil Rights Movement. One of our denomination's most celebrated historians is the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, and he is a scholar of Black Unitarian Universalist history. He researched and published a book entitled The Selma Awakening: How the Civil Rights Movement Tested and Changed Unitarian Universalism. This book was published in 2014, and it's really a very interesting book, and I highly recommend anyone who's interested in history to spend some time with this book. It chronicles the relationship between the Unitarian Universalist Association's leadership and membership with the historic events that led up to the Voting Right March in Selma. In his book, he states that the March in Selma presented a test for Unitarian Universalists. And the test was, did freedom merely mean freedom of belief and conscience? Or did it also include the civic, political, and economic freedoms the educated middle class, liberal religious constituency took for granted. In other words, did our reasons for marching hinge on the need to truly enact and live into the democratic process in all of human relations? We know we have both joys and sorrows in our denomination's relationship with anti-racism efforts and living out our fifth principle. We can be proud of the fact that both Unitarians and Universalists were strident in their calls to end slavery in the 1800s. We can be proud of the fact that busloads of our people, over 1,600, attended the March on Washington in 1963, answering Dr. King's call. We can be proud that 177 of our ministers and seminarians journeyed to Selma and Montgomery in March of 1965. No one can deny the significance of the events in Selma to galvanize our denomination around the issues of voting rights, really such a fundamental component in a democracy. This morning, we've heard the voices of two different women who are not really known. First Frances, and now you're going to learn more about Viola and how they chose to enact their Unitarian Universalist values. But to set the stage, I'm going to take you back to March 7th, 1965. Many of you know that this Sunday was called Bloody Sunday, and it is a marker in our nation's history of the legacy of slavery in the lives of so many people. On that Sunday in Selma, Alabama, 600 African American marchers attempted to cross the Pettus Bridge, leading to the state capitol in Montgomery. These citizens were clubbed, tear-gassed, and trampled by Alabama state troopers and other deputized men, many of them Klansmen. The violence was caught. This mass violence was caught by TV reporters, and it was just on every TV station in the nation. And so Americans were really brought face to face with this brutality. But not only Americans, people around the globe were able to see what was really happening in the United States as people were really asking for very basic freedoms and rights in a democratic society. The next day, on March 8th, Dr. King sent a telegram to clergy leaders around the country asking them to come to Selma, asking them to support this march and to support these nonviolent efforts to secure basic rights for African American citizens. Within 2 days, 60 Unitarian Universalist ministers had made the pilgrimage to Selma. At the time, that was nearly 10% of our clergy, our parish ministers. The next day, on Tuesday, March 9th, defying a court injunction not to march, Dr. King led a group of about 2,500 marchers to the entrance of the Pettus Bridge. After praying there, Dr. King decided that this was not the day to march, and the group returned to Brown Chapel. Brown Chapel was really serving as the hub, the communications center for the marchers. That night, after dinner at Walker's Cafe, the Unitarian Universalist minister, James Reeb, and 2 colleagues called their families, assured their wives and children that they were safe, and they decided to take a shortcut back from the cafe to Brown Chapel. Several white locals had been following them, and they raced out of an alley, and they began beating the 3 ministers with baseball bats and their fists. James Reeb was hit in the head with a baseball bat, and he died 2 days later in the Birmingham Medical Center. After the death of our minister, James Reeb, hundreds of Unitarian Universalists raced down to Selma to attend his memorial service and to stay and provide support for what was truly becoming the march of the century. So how did Viola Liuzzo, a 39-year-old homemaker, student, and activist from Detroit, Michigan, find herself in Selma, Alabama that week? Viola was not born into Unitarianism or Universalism, and her life had not been an easy one. She grew up impoverished in Tennessee and Georgia, the daughter of a coal miner and a school teacher, just trying to eke out a living during the Great Depression. When Viola was 17, the family moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan, simply to try to find work. And it was there that she soon found a job in a cafeteria in Detroit. And this is the same year that she met Sarah Evans, an African-American woman who would become her best friend and really a second mother to her children. Viola had married young at age 18 to get out of her home life, and she had 2 children with her first husband, whom she divorced. She later married James Liuzzo, and they had 3 more children together. By all accounts, Viola was a devoted mother who would help anyone in need. So much so that sometimes she and Jim had arguments about her tender heart and her willingness to help so many people. She took her children camping and rock climbing, and she played classical music at home. She was known by friends and family to be loving, curious, sometimes impetuous, and often strong-willed. She had regretted her decision to drop out of high school. And so in her 30s, she received her GED, and then enrolled in Wayne State University at the age of 39. There she fell in love with Plato, Henry David Thoreau, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Viola was greatly and deeply impressed by Thoreau. She loved nature and also Thoreau's unconventional stand on public issues. In his essay, Civil Disobedience, Viola read his words: "There are thousands who are in opinion opposed to slavery, yet who in effect do nothing to end it, who, esteeming themselves children of Washington and Franklin, sit down with their hands in their pockets and say they do not know what to do, and so they do nothing." This writing really encouraged Viola to become more engaged in the civil rights issues that were sweeping the nation at that time. And so she carried this observation of the 19th century abolitionist fight for civil rights to her generation. Viola was a woman of action, and to do nothing was not her way. At her time in Wayne State, she had met young people who had been freedom riders in the summer of 1964. She was fascinated by their stories and by their call to action and their need to fulfill this call to action. She also joined the First Unitarian Church of Detroit, which was then a hotbed of social activism. When she saw the events of Bloody Sunday on TV, along with the rest of the nation, she decided that she wanted to help in whatever way that she could. On March 16th, she called her husband Jim from the Wayne State campus and told him she was going to Selma. He begged her to at least come back and say goodbye to the children, but Viola had made her decision and she was ready to go. Jim asked if he could come with her, and she said no, this was something that she needed to do by herself. She wanted to do this on her own as a woman, as a person, as a Unitarian. Viola drove 3 days and nights over 1,000 miles to get to Selma. Historians could find no records of hotels or motel receipts or her name in any of the guest books, and so many researchers believe that she may have just stopped and slept in her car on her way down there as she needed. She arrived Friday afternoon and immediately began working the hospitality table at Brown Chapel. She boarded with the Jackson family, and in a few short days, she and the family had made plans for their teenage daughter to come back and stay in Detroit with Viola's family to start a new life in the North. Viola also donated her car for voter registration workers to use and volunteered to drive marchers back to Selma once the rally in Montgomery had concluded. After marching to the Montgomery State Capitol, Viola and a young Selma native named Leroy Moten began to ferry marchers back from Montgomery to Selma. It was 7 p.m. when they teamed up to make their last ride from Selma to Montgomery to pick up any last stragglers. This was very important to get all of the marchers to safety or even out of the state as quickly as possible. President Johnson had federalized 1,800 Alabama National Guardsmen and sent 2,000 additional troops and 100 FBI agents to Montgomery to provide backup safety for the marchers. Now, the marchers had been urged and coached to really get out of Selma the moment that the rally ended. There were elaborate exit plans to get the Northerners to the airport and bus depots very quickly because the National Guard would pull out at 9 p.m. that night, and only a skeleton crew of law enforcement would be on hand. And that skeleton crew could not necessarily be trusted with the safety of the marchers. The state and the local police were well aware of these orders. And that night, driving along Route 80, Viola and Leroy Moten were boxed in by 2 cars carrying Klansmen and an FBI informant. To this day, nobody knows who fired the shots that instantly killed Viola, and Leroy was killed as well. The situation in the South was surreal in terms of law enforcement. The police often worked with the Klan, and the FBI offered no protection even when they knew of murder plans. The men in the cars were tried twice and found not guilty of murder by an all-white jury. This was justice in Alabama for a white woman who was driving with a black man in the front of her car. Viola's family really disintegrated after her murder. Death threats were made at her home in Detroit, and Jim Liuzzo had to hire round-the-clock guards. The children were harassed at school, prompting school changes. The FBI began a smear campaign against Viola to cover up the fact that an FBI informant had been in the car and may have even been the trigger man. Viola was accused of drinking, taking drugs, having an affair with Leroy Moten, and none of this was true. The public was scandalized that a housewife with 5 children would run off to Selma, and a white woman driving alone with a black man was simply unheard of in the Jim Crow South. After her death, the chaplain at Wayne State said of Viola, "She consistently chose the role of a worker. She epitomized the very strong person in the freedom movement who doesn't ask to be a leader. People like her make up the moral backbone of movements." The moral backbone of movements. And just a few years after her death, Viola was virtually forgotten in the civil rights literature. Many folks in that era truly believed that a woman's place was in the home with her family. Things really hadn't changed that much from the middle of the 1800s with Frances Harper to the middle of the 1900s with Viola Liuzzo. Jack Mendelson writes in his book, The Martyrs, 16 Who Died for Civil Rights. When Viola went to Selma, she thought she was serving her family. Her family was mankind. There is currently a beautiful memorial in Montgomery that has the names of all of the civil rights marchers who died inscribed. And Viola Liuzzo's name is on that memorial. And she is the only white woman who lost her life in that fight. We can see in Viola's life a model for us in this respect. When asked why she wanted to go to march in Selma, she answered, "This is everybody's fight. There are too many people just standing around and talking. I'm going." These words really echo what she had read in the essay, Civil Disobedience. It was that simple and clear to Viola. And I too, and I'm sure all of you believe that each of us is responsible for engaging in the continuing fight for respect, for basic human rights that everyone in our democracy of the United States is entitled to. All of us are responsible for engaging in this fight, also knowing that we will engage in very different ways according to our means, according to our gifts, according to our own conscience. Our faith calls us to be aware of injustice and not to turn away. Viola chose to be a worker. Frances Harper was a writer and a teacher and a poet. Each of us must use our own conscience to foster the fifth principle and how we will enact this out in our lives. Personally, congregationally, and regionally, I exhort you to continue to follow your conscience in healing this world. Blessed be.
Now, just as Viola said, "I'm going," let's pick up the hymnal and sing "I'm on my way," number 116. Today we will extinguish the flame with different words provided by Reverend Rina. I think you will appreciate the challenge embedded in this message. The words will appear on the screen as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of love and commitment in our hearts. Now, go into the world with resolve, with acts large and small, become a piece of the moral backbone of the world. Now I have just a couple of announcements. Please don't forget that the congregational meeting will be held here in the sanctuary at 11:15. Don't forget to sign the book as you come in. And next Sunday, May 28th, there will be no in-church service and no service on YouTube. Instead, we're having a church picnic at Emshoff Woods Park at 11 o'clock. There have been a couple of changes of venue, and it is really at Emshoff Woods Park. This is west of downtown and east of Mount St. Joseph, so it's not that far away. We're going to meet at Rivermount Pavilion, and you'll need to say you're with First Unitarian to get free parking. We will send directions later this week. And I wanted to point out, as other members pointed out to me, because I was completely unaware, it's very fitting that we should use this as a location for our church picnic, because we had longtime First Church members, George and Margaret Emshoff, who donated their property to Hamilton County Parks, and this became Emshoff Woods Park. Margaret also left a bequest that pays for the Easter flowers for our children for the church every year. Now, there will be no worship service at the picnic, it'll be a fun picnic in a beautiful setting. Please bring a dish to share, bring your own table service if you can. You might want to bring a camp chair. Feel free to bring outdoor, lawn games. There will be kids' games planned. So please come and have fun. There will be no rain date if, unfortunately, we're rained out, but that's not going to happen, right? So, thanks everybody. We'll see you at the congregational meeting.